what's up? It's Mr. Moon, and today we're going to dive into beta-alanine supplementation. What is it? What does it actually do? This question was asked to me pretty recently, and I figured it was an interesting enough topic that I could do another little deep dive on. So the first things first, we have to go over a bit of exercise physiology to understand why someone would be interested in this in the first place. So I have a lot of words up here on screen. You might be a little bit too small for you to read, but I'm going to go through them with you. So we're going to start with anaerobic glycolysis, okay? So glycolysis looks like this, where's my little thing? Glycolysis, to simplify it as much as possible, you have, it's like this right here. Oh, now I can go back right here. So with glycolysis, you have 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Glucose is a 6-carbon molecule, and what you're doing is essentially splitting it into 2 3-carbon molecules, okay, and moving around some phosphate groups, right? So you have some phosphate groups that get moved around, and you wind up with 2-pyruvate. That is an extremely simplified version of glycolysis. But what I want you to understand is when we're moving around these phosphate groups, we are producing some hydrogen ions. Why are hydrogen ions bad? Well, the thing that they do is they contribute to something known as acidosis. If you paid attention in chemistry in high school, you might remember a term called pH, right? pH is essentially per hydrogen, how much hydrogen is present, okay? So that's why we have this pH drop during anaerobic glycolysis. Not only that, but we have the hydrolysis of ATP during muscle contraction, which produces hydrogen, right? ATP is your body's energy currency. It has 3 phosphates, adenosine triphosphate, and it has, your little adenosine group or whatever, okay? So when it gets hydrolyzed, we're essentially lopping off one of those phosphate groups for energy, and this occurs during muscle contraction. That could be a whole nother video. But again, that produces another hydrogen ion, which contributes to the acidosis, okay? So why does this matter? Because during glycolysis, you produce something called lactate as well. Now, pyruvate, as I mentioned before, is the end product of glycolysis. But without oxygen, it gets converted into something called lactate or lactic acid, right? Here's the problem with that. It doesn't actually cause soreness like a lot of people say it does. First of all, lactic acid only exists very briefly. It immediately disassociates into lactate and a hydrogen ion. Lactate can be a whole separate video. There's a lot to talk about with lactate, but lactate's actually your friend. It can be used as a secondary energy source. It can actually be converted back into glucose to serve for more muscle contractions. It's worth mentioning here, glycolysis means the breaking down of sugar, which can be either glycogen, which is glucose sugar that's stored in your muscles, or just glucose itself, right? So we have all this hydrogen building up due to fast glycolysis, okay, and muscle contractions. We have a local pH drop from 7.0 to 6.4. And you say, well, that's not, super significant. That's extremely significant on a biological scale in the human body because the pH scale is logarithmic, meaning that the difference between 7 and 6 is a factor of like 100 or 10. I can't remember exactly which, but you understand what I mean. I think it's 100. Why do we care? Like, why does the body want to maintain a specific pH level? Well, 2 things. Number 1, you have enzymes. There are certain enzymes which are important for energy production, okay? One of them is phosphofructokinase, which is the most important enzyme in glycolysis. And glycolysis is where we're producing energy in something like a set of squats or a sprint, right? You also have creatine kinase, which is another energy system, much simpler. People supplement creatine, another video for another day. But essentially, the way the phosphophagin system works is you have creatine and ADP, adenosine diphosphate. Excuse me, you have phosphocreatine and adenosine diphosphate, and creatine kinase takes that and converts it into ATP and creatine, okay? And this reaction is reversible, so when you're at rest, it reverses, okay? But that creates energy within the first couple of seconds of you doing anything hard, okay? But those enzymes will begin to break down in an acidic environment. So we have to mitigate, your body has to mitigate that in order to sustain the work rate, right? So how does your body do that? It has several what we call buffering systems. A buffer is going to resist any change in pH, okay? The first ones we have listed on this side right here are your intramuscular buffers, okay? The first one we have is your phosphate buffers. So creatine phosphate is going to react to generate ATP, and that's going to temporarily slow hydrogen ion accumulation because not as much hydrogen ions are produced in the phosphophagin system as are produced in anaerobic glycolysis, okay? And the next one we have is protein buffers. So myosin and actin are the two primary proteins in your muscle that actually allow it to contract, but they have these histidine side chains that bind up hydrogen, which is important for muscle contraction because hydrogen ions, if they bind in the wrong place, can interfere with calcium's ability to initiate muscle contraction. So these histidine side chains make a special place for them to live so that hopefully they don't start jamming up the works, right? That also buffers against the actual acidosis of the environment. Acidosis is the accumulation of acid. The last one, well, second to last one we have right there is the bicarbonate buffers, which are inside the cell. We'll get to this equation a little bit later, but basically what it is when you have CO2 and water, it can be converted into bicarbonate and a hydrogen ion, right? And that's reversible, and we'll see why that's important later, but bicarbonate binds up that hydrogen ion, and you get CO2 and water, which you know that we wind up exhaling when we breathe, right? The last thing is carnosine, which is what we care about for the topic of beta-alanine. So when you combine beta-alanine and histidine, you're able to really effectively buffer against the accumulation of hydrogen ions because it can go and it can bind them up. Bind them up, we mean like attaching to them essentially. And you find carnosine in high levels in your fast twitch fibers, okay? Over here, we have the blood buffers. So what's happening in your, these are not your blood buffers, but this is how, okay, we have all this stuff going on right here. How does your muscle get the hydrogen ions out of it? Because it's like, okay, we can do so much to control hydrogen ions within the muscle, but at a certain point, we got to start pumping stuff out to the blood because we can't take it anymore. We will not be able to maintain the work rate that we are at if we don't do something to get rid of these hydrogen ions quicker. So your muscle is trying to pump it out to the blood. There's three ways it does that. The first one we have is the sodium hydrogen exchanger. It's found on the muscle cell membrane, and it's going to export one hydrogen for every sodium that's brought in. And it's your kind of first line of defense against hydrogen accumulation. Then you have the monocarboxylate transporters, MCT1 and 4. So in MCT4, in your fast twitch fibers, which is primarily what we care about, it's going to export lactate and hydrogen ions into the bloodstream, which supports something called the Cori cycle, which I can make a video on if you're interested. Then we have the MCT1, which is in slow twitch fibers. It's going to import lactate and hydrogen ions, using them as fuel inside the mitochondria. Why is this important? Because what's happening is let's say I'm doing a set of bicep curls, all right? Heavy bicep curls, I'm working my fast twitch muscles. What my body will do is it will send hydrogen over to my slow twitch fibers, which really aren't doing that much work and aren't important for it. They're saying we can sacrifice the contributions of the slow twitch fibers because they're their ability to maintain this sort of work is so insignificant that we can suffer, more acidosis or muscle damage there, right? Which is mega interesting. So you can see that they cooperate. Type 2 fibers are just going to dump the acid into type 1 fibers. But the type 1 fibers can actually clean it up because they're more resistant to fatigue. That's the difference between type 1 and type 2 in a way, is that type 1 fibers, that's like your marathon running type fibers, where they're very fatigue resistant. So they're much better at dealing with acidosis than type 2 fibers. Type 2 fibers produce a ton of acid, but that's because they produce more force. They have more, They have more actual proteins within them, and so there's more binding sites for myosin, and therefore more ATP hydrolysis and more hydrogen ions produced. I know that's a lot right there. The last one we have is the chlorine and HCO3 exchanger, otherwise known as the anion exchanger. It's going to swap intracellular bicarbonate for extracellular chloride, right? Or chloride, yeah. This helps export acid equivalents as carbonic acid, H2CO3, which quickly breaks down into CO2 and water, right? Pretty simple. Basically, you're just putting more H2CO3 in the bloodstream, which gets bound up by, if I go to the next one, your bicarbonate buffer system, okay? So you can see the H2CO3 right there. And it's your most powerful buffer system, and it's the one your body wants to use the most because it's your most powerful buffer system, and your body is able to use it really effectively by just increasing the rate at which you are inhaling and exhaling. So that's why we breathe quickly and heavily when we're working hard, is to increase that respiration rate. It's really not so much that you can get in more oxygen if you're doing a glycolytic exercise. It's so that you can expel more CO2, right? Your body needs to get rid of the carbon dioxide that's building up because it's using it to get rid of the hydrogen ions, right? Your bloodstream actually has receptors for CO2, and so not oxygen. So it's never the deprivation of oxygen that your body's detecting. It's always just the accumulation of CO2. Okay. Oh. Hey, what's up, Christian?
I'm leaving because I'm going to the doctor because I think I'm sick or something.
Really? You're sick?
I don't know, but
Yeah.
do I have any assignments that we're doing today?
Nothing special.
Okay, just finish up days assignments and that project.
Yeah, dude.
Okay.
Word up.
Thank you.
The next thing we have is the Haldane effect, which is the red blood cells actually bind to hydrogen ions as they release oxygen. So the oxygen carriers, your hemoglobin, can actually double as acid sponges. So you can have like carboxyl hemoglobin instead of your oxyhemoglobin, right? Next thing we have is plasma proteins. Albumin and other plasma proteins contribute smaller and slower buffering effects. Some of them are kind of indirect. And then long term, the renal system. Kidneys are going to remove hydrogen and reabsorb bicarbonate. This is more so when you're recovering from exercise than anything else. So when it comes to beta-alanine supplementation, the thing we have to remember is that beta-alanine is the precursor to carnosine, and carnosine is found within your type 2 muscle fibers primarily. You cannot supplement carnosine directly. It's like, well, why not supplement with carnosine if that's the thing actually doing the buffering? Your muscle cells can't really take in carnosine. It just doesn't work. They've done studies. They've tried it. They readily do absorb beta-alanine. Okay, and when beta-alanine gets inside the muscle cell, it can combine with histidine, and carnosine is readily synthesized. It's much easier to synthesize within the muscle cell. Anything else? Yeah, it's kind of one of those things that will probably get you 1% more out of your progress in the gym. But if you stack that up over enough time, it could make a significant difference for some people. And if you're a person that tends to get really sore and suffer with fatigue management, it could also help with that. I have not read any studies on that, but I think the mechanisms are there for it to manifest, simply because you're reducing, you're increasing your body's ability to deal with acidosis related muscle damage. Yeah. And it's also worth noting that the buffering effect is most effective in glycolytic activities, those activities that last around 1 to 4 minutes at a time. And so you might not get a ton of usage out of it if you're doing something like a marathon. But if you're lifting weights at the gym, and maybe if you're an older adult who needs that extra little boost against the burning sensation, or if you find that incredibly uncomfortable, it might help you. There are some negative effects associated with taking large doses of beta alanine. Primarily, you hear about the beta alanine tingles. Some of that can be ascribed to companies. They will take vitamin C and put like a load of vitamin C into something instead of beta alanine. So check your dosages if you do take a supplement. Make sure it has actual beta alanine in there, and they are prescribing you the proper dosages, which can be like about, I think it's 3.5 to 6.5 grams or something like that, based off of your body weight and preference. But yeah, leave a comment for what topics I should dive into next, and thanks for watching.